Daub, Faculty Director of the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. For those of you not familiar with us, the Clayman Institute conducts research around topics related to feminism, gender, race, and sexuality, brings together and supports communities of interdisciplinary scholars, and endeavors to translate gender research to broad audiences. The Clayman Institute was founded all the way back in 1974. Back then, almost 50 years ago now, a small group of committed women took the bold steps that led to the formation of what was originally called the Center for Research on Women, or CROW, and now is known as the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. CROW became a national hub for cutting-edge research and interdisciplinary dialogue on women's issues, and established Stanford as a leading pioneer in gender scholarship. We are forever grateful to our founders and believe it's important to preserve this history and ensure our origin story and those integral to it are remembered by future generations. Every few years, to that end, we honor some of the many individuals that were instrumental in our founding. At our last event in 2018, we honored founding director Myra Strober, who you will hear from in just a bit. Today, we are thrilled to be honoring Beth Garfield and Cynthia Russell. Beth and Cynthia were Stanford students back then, along with their good friend, the late Susan Heck. These three students worked closely with our founding director, Myra Strober, and others to convince Stanford that there was an important need for a center for research on women at the university. Not an easy feat back then. The fact that they came up with this idea and worked with the right people across campus to ultimately make this happen is incredibly inspiring. While I didn't have the chance to meet Susan before she passed, I have certainly heard about her being a key contributor to the Institute's early days. I know Beth and Cynthia will be sharing more about their memories of her, and I look forward to hearing their stories. Beth and Cynthia, we're so thankful to you both for not only for your efforts back in the 1970s, but the fact that you have both stayed so close to the Institute ever since then. Beth and Cynthia are both longtime advisors serving on our advisory council and are some of our biggest supporters. We're so appreciative of your time, your guidance, your support, and your leadership over the years. Now, let us continue. I'm happy to hand it over to Myra Strober, founding director and longtime advisor to the Clayman Institute, who will say a few words about Beth and Cynthia.
Hello, everyone. It's very exciting that we're going to revisit the founding of the Clayman Institute, lo those many years ago. Cynthia Davis, Beth Garfield, and Susan Heck each came to me separately. Susan was a graduate student, Beth and Cindy were undergraduates. I was a new assistant professor, and they found me because Stanford had made a big press conference when I came here, along with several other women, because having women faculty members was such a new idea. Beth, Cindy, and Beth, Cindy, and Susan all had the same idea, but they didn't know each other. Each wanted to start a research center for women, about women at Stanford. They were very clear that they wanted it to be a research center and not a place for women to talk about their own lives. I put them together and I told them that we needed more powerful faculty. I was a new assistant professor. I had no power at all. And so they found the powerful faculty: Eleanor Maccabee, Jim March, Elizabeth Cohen, the dean of the law school, the dean of the School of Engineering, Bill Case, who had many daughters and was interested in this topic. And we all worked together to start the center. The president of the university, Dick Lyman, and his wife, Jean Lyman, were extremely supportive of us and very helpful. And the provost of the university, Bill Miller, and his wife, Pat Miller, also. And so we put together a policy board and off we went. Eventually, we got money from the Ford Foundation, and Beth and Cindy will tell you more about it. I am delighted that they and I have remained involved with the Clayman all these years, and that we are about to tell you its history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Myra, for that wonderful reflection. Now I'll hand it over to Beth and Cynthia, who will walk us through their experience founding the Institute back when they were students in a slideshow that they've kindly put together. Take it away.
So Beth, we both started Stanford in September 1970. I came from a small town in New York called Pound Ridge.
I came from San Diego. The world that we grew up in was so different from the world we entered at Stanford.
It was the middle of the anti-war protests. I remember that when we arrived on campus as freshmen, a lot of the windows were damaged and boarded up on Hoover Library and other buildings from the campus protests. It was a time when students felt empowered to take action and affect change, but there were no clear models about how change could be made.
As students, we believed without any doubt that we were going to change the world, and especially for women. It was a very exciting time to be a woman at Stanford.
So true. When we started at Stanford, 36% of our class were women.
Although by today's standards, that seems like very few women, it was actually a rapid increase from the 3 classes before us, which together had less than 30% women.
What I remember most vividly is how few women professors there were. In 1970, only 15% of the faculty were women, and most of them were assistant professors. I remember that I didn't have an advisor or had declared a major until my junior year, when I took Shelley Rosaldo and Jane Collier's anthropology class, Women in Cross-Cultural Perspective, and I knew then that I had found my major.
Interesting. I also gravitated towards a department that had women professors. I majored in psychology, which was the only department chaired by a woman at Stanford. Eleanor Maccabee was also one of very few tenured women faculty members at Stanford in the 1970s.
But there was an energy on campus that things were changing for women. Women students were gaining a greater awareness of gender bias in the university and in the world. And women and men faculty were quietly conducting research on women and offering classes about women in their departments.
This was the environment in which the Center for Research on Women, also known as CROW, was born. There were 3 student founders of CROW: Susan Heck, who was getting her PhD in the School of Education, and you and I, who were both undergraduates. Cindy, how did you first get involved?
I first got involved when I helped organize a noon lecture series in the spring of 1973 with a group of women who wanted to feature professors doing research on the changing roles of women. My early interest was on finding ways to support professors and students doing research on women. Beth, do you remember how you got involved?
I ran for ASSU president in April of 1973. And one of the things in my platform was to create a Women's Studies Institute. At the time, it was more about classes about women than research about women. After I was elected, I got together with you and Susan, and we created a steering committee in the fall of 1973 to combine our efforts on problems affecting women. But we were still figuring out what we wanted to create.
It's been so interesting to look back at some of the articles that were in the Stanford Daily about CROW during our meetings in the fall of 1973. We were talking about creating a women's studies major, about being an umbrella group for women's caucuses in the departments, and having a speakers program. We also talked about helping those faculty and students doing research on women connect with each other.
I remember, Cindy, that you always brought us back, though, to setting up a center for research on women.
A big turning point in our work came when you said we could apply for a student project grant that will give us an office and a telephone in the old firehouse. But there was a catch. We had to have a faculty sponsor, and that's what brought us to Myra Strober.
I'm still amazed that we approached Myra with this. She was a very young, very new assistant professor in the business school, not exactly a place that was known for its support of women. but I'm even more amazed that Myra agreed to get involved.
And not only did she get involved, but she led the charge with other faculty members and formulated the proposal to create a separate university office devoted to research on women. She helped us articulate what we wanted. We also found that we had support from Jing Lyman, who was a force at Stanford and who regularly attended our noon lectures. She convinced her husband, Dick Lyman, who was president at Stanford at the time, to support us.
Yes, I remember that Jean was a big supporter of our lecture series, which was open to everyone in the Stanford community.
That's right. Having the community attend our lectures was very important to us. We held the weekly talks in a small auditorium in the business school to showcase all the research on women that was being done on campus and elsewhere. One of our most famous speakers in March of 1974 was Herbert Marcuse, a well-known Marxist philosophy professor at UCSD who spoke on feminism and Marxism.
I will never forget that day. People started arriving at the business school, and it became very clear very quickly that we were not going to be able to accommodate everyone in the auditorium. So we moved it to Memorial Auditorium. I don't remember exactly how we did it so quickly, but we did.
Over 1,500 people attended that lecture. I remember standing on the side of the auditorium as you introduced Marcuse.
It was exciting, but I remember also being pretty nervous standing at the podium. What was most exciting, though, was what Marcuse said about feminism. It's hard to understand what it was like during the early 70s. Feminism was struggling to be recognized and acknowledged as a legitimate political movement, especially with the left, which was dominant on college campuses. And here's what Marcuse said. Feminism is the most important and potentially the most radical movement we have. The cheering was deafening.
By early 1974, we had formulated a specific idea of what CROW would be, and we began to gather support from the faculty. Myra was instrumental in leading us in collecting information and recruiting a policy board, and she worked with us to prepare a proposal for the administration to create a separate university office for research on women. In the spring of 1974, you graduated, and Susan and I continued to work with Myra to create CROW. When you graduated, you were acknowledged for all the work you did helping Stanford women when you received the Dinkelspiel Award. What did that award mean to you?
For me, it publicly validated the importance of women students to the Stanford community. The part of the award that I loved the most was, and I quote, for her consistent, lively, and thoughtful efforts to educate the university about its women and its women about themselves. And CROW was a big part of that.
Before you left, we achieved a huge milestone. In June of 1974, the university accepted our proposal to create a separate research office on women and provided seed funding of $20,000 from Stanford and an additional $10,000 grant from the Robert Sterling Clark Foundation.
Truly an incredible achievement. A student project had within 1 year become a university-funded research office. But what's even more amazing is what you and Susan and Myra did afterwards. I left for law school, but the three of you stayed on and built CROW and created the foundation for what is now the Clayman Institute for Gender Research. What do you remember most about those early years?
I remember that our next big achievement was when Myra secured a $25,000 grant from the Ford Foundation and additional funding from the Clark Foundation in October of 1974 to fund research on women, and the university gave us 2 rooms in Polya Hall for our offices. Today, that would be a grant of almost $140,000. That's when CROW was officially opened.
CROW continued to hold lecture series to help recruit women faculty members and also supporting women and men who were doing research on women's issues. What else did it do?
The thing that I remember most is the quantity of research, programs, lectures, visiting scholars, and other activities that we organized, and how much material there was for us to work with. We created a welcoming resource center and a hub of information for students and faculty in our 2 rooms. That original ethos of Crow remains today at Clayman.
Cindy, looking back, who were some of the other faculty members and administrators who played a real role in the founding and making Crow actually happen?
Myra mentioned some of them, but Crow then and now has always been about collaboration. There were many people who helped us succeed in the early years. In addition to the policy board members Myra mentioned, Eleanor Maccabee, Tom Ehrlich, Lee Kaplan, Elizabeth Cohen, and of course Myra, we had support from Provost Miller and his wife Pat, Cecilia Borsiaga, Ann Miner, Dave Tyak, Jim March, as well as other students and community members.
It has been exciting to watch Crow become what it is today. It is so much more than we ever hoped for.
I'm just sorry that Susan can't be with us to celebrate. I'm so grateful that the 3 of us kept a connection over the years as members of Clayman Institute's Advisory Council.
Susan and I both made our homes in Los Angeles, and it was wonderful to renew and strengthen our friendship as we both had families and pursued our careers. And Cindy, I don't think you'll be surprised to hear this. Susan brought together a group of women in Los Angeles who had a connection to the Clayman Institute, and we got together every few months for dinner.
It doesn't surprise me at all. That's one of the things that she did. She brought people together. I remember that Susan's advice was to partner with people who complement you, and she wanted Crow to be both a research center and a place to enhance the education of women at Stanford.
When Susan passed away in 2013, I went to her memorial service, but we didn't mourn her, we celebrated her. And I remember how wonderful it was to have people from the Clayman Institute there to join us in that celebration.
And we continue to celebrate Susan. She loved the whole process of creating Crow, of building support, of figuring out ways that roadblocks could be faced, of turning a dream into something real, of creating something important.
Susan did not start graduate school right out of college. She went into the Peace Corps in Ethiopia, and talking with her about that experience taught me who she was. A visionary, and at the same time, a pragmatist. If Susan were here today, I can just hear her saying, okay, guys, it's fine to talk about the past, to reflect on the past, but let's concentrate on the future. How are we going to use gender research to change the world?
Susan, today the Clayman Institute is honoring its founders. We share this honor with you, and we thank all of you for celebrating the founding of the Institute with us today.
Thank you, Beth and Cynthia, for that amazing presentation. It's so wonderful to hear how the Clayman Institute's roots are due to student activism, as our mission today, I think to this day, continues to be centered around research that can help make the world a better place. Beth and Cynthia, we are so thankful to have you as advisors and as friends for the Institute and for all of us here at the Institute. And we're also so grateful for the important contributions of the late Susan Heck. It has truly been an honor to hear your story today, and I'm sure others will continue to hear, to be inspired by your story as we share it more widely. Thank you so much again, and thank you for everything that you have done for us, and thank you for everything you do for us to this very day. Thank you.